So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Young. I am fortunate to be the program manager for the Texas Child Psychiatry Access Network in Northeast Texas. For 2023, this is our first session, and we are presenting Click Here, How Internet Use and Social Media Affect Children's Mental Health. We are partnering with two partners this year with us as well. We are partnering with UTMB out of Galveston and the CPAN program down there. We're also partnering with UT Tyler School of Nursing and their education program and providing continuing education credits to nurses here in Texas as well. And throughout the session today, you will see a few pings that happen in the chat box. Please take a look at those if you can. Also, if you have questions for our presenters today, answering those questions, and we like to be able to have those, and no question is a silly question, because if you've got one, 10 other people have that same question. So let me first introduce Dr. Simmons. So Dr. Stephanie Simmons is a child and adolescent psychologist here at the University of Texas at Tyler Health Science Center. She holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from Baylor University. She completed her predoctoral internship in community mental health in Cincinnati, Ohio. Oh, she must be a Bengals fan then. Before returning to Texas for her postdoctoral residency in pediatric psychology at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. Dr. Simmons currently serves as the training director for the psychology internship program at UT Tyler Health Science Center and provides outpatient psychological services to children, adolescents, and their families. She's passionate about training and education, specifically in the areas of trauma prevention and intervention. We also have with us today as a co-presenter Wiley Martin. Wiley is an LPCS, a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and has over 20 years of experience in the mental health field, the last 13 years as an LPCS. His interests include in working with children, couples, and families with a wide range of difficulties. Wiley has served as the Director of Crisis Services for Local Mental Health Authority in East Texas during the crisis redesign in Texas between 2008 and 2010. He has worked in numerous different settings, including counseling for a women's shelter in Northeast Texas, working in residential treatment centers for girls and teens, as well as leading a counseling center in Sulphur Springs. Wiley is one of our behavioral health specialists on CPAN, and we're very fortunate to have him with us and Dr. Simmons today. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Wiley, right now, and allow you to share your screen, and I am going to back away.
Okay, thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. And Dr. Simmons, once I get to that transition, just let me know if you may continue with the slides, or if you want me to just stop sharing and I'll hand over to you.
If once we get the PowerPoint up, we can just leave it up, and if you don't mind just driving for me, that would be perfect.
Sure, no problem.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully this is beneficial for you. This is certainly a subject that I'm very passionate about, and I think is really important. Probably understated a lot of times in clinical settings. So thank you again. For today, we're really just going to focus on the mental health aspects of social media use. So this includes talking to parents about how their child can better use social media and how they can support their children in healthy browsing habits. So we want to also give parents really practical examples, or equip you all with some things to give to parents, or real practical things they can do at home, even if the parent is not tech savvy, or if you're not, as a provider, not super tech savvy. I'm definitely not. So hopefully there's some things here today we can help out with as well. So as we go through the presentation today, please feel free to add questions in the comments, questions or comments in the chat, like Laura had mentioned. So one of the things that we want to emphasize today is all social media is not a bad thing. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics, obviously you see on the screen here, has several things that are actually positives about social media use. And so I want to emphasize those first before we look at areas where it may be unhealthy. So one of them is, as you can see, opportunities to engage the community through social media, fundraising, charity events. I have a good friend of mine whose daughter is diagnosed with autism. If I could show you the video, I would. She helps her daughter put on a video sales presentation every year. And the last time we did this presentation in the past year, I believe, she did the same thing. So she'll do a video of her daughter giving a sales pitch in her full Girl Scout uniform and post it to Facebook. And she's a fantastic salesperson. And so we always buy cookies from them. So it is a great opportunity for her to get out in a social media platform and then go deliver the cookies. So socially being able to connect with people, and her mom uses obviously Facebook to do that. Another positive aspects of social media is just the utilization to be connected to other people. I know there's been tons of talk about COVID and the pandemic. One aspect about being socially connected, using social media rather, is being able to stay connected during the pandemic. So Facebook, Instagram, just demonstrating kind of what you're doing, connecting, letting people that know that they're not alone, and especially with the isolation with everyone. The other thing is just being able to have some self-expression. So as a child or a teen, if you have an area in your life that you're really into a certain type of music or a hobby, that's also a way to connect with people that may not be in your local area, but you can connect with other people that can encourage that hobby or that the same interest level. So the next thing the Academy really recommends in regards to the role of the pediatrician and in this study, or this recommendations rather, and I don't think this is just limited obviously to pediatricians. Anybody that's working with a kid, I think this is relevant. So being able to for the parent to talk to the child, or encouraging the parent to talk to the child about social media use. So in previous presentations we've had through CPAN, we've talked about how difficult it can be to talk about suicide or ask about suicide with young kids. Because if you ask and you're specific and you ask about suicidal thoughts, then you have to be prepared depending on what the answer is. So if the answer is yes, I'm suicidal, then what's the next thing you need to do? So a lot of times it's not necessarily about asking the question, it's about what do I do after that? So if I'm asking about social media in a session or meeting with an individual, which I do on a regular basis now, I want to know their social media habits. I need to be specific. If I'm uncomfortable, the person I'm talking to is going to be uncomfortable. So just something to keep in mind. So talking about things such as cyberbullying, online harassment, something called Facebook depression, just the ongoing, are there ongoing images or postings from individuals on Facebook where you feel like you have to live up to a certain standard, or social media in general. So a good example of this is today. I am putting my best foot forward as a counselor, right? I want you guys to see me in a certain light. That's not all of who I am. And so social media magnifies that. when I'm on social media. I don't put all my faults and failings and, how many times I've done something wrong. It's when people are on social media, they usually put everything that's going right, pictures from the beach and everything else. So really trying to uh, encourage children and parents to really have more of a social connection in person. And again, I'm not going to exhaust the slide here. You see the other roles, the pediatrician in the primary care setting. Dr. Simmons and Dr. Ross Young had actually presented, I think over a year ago now, something I was really impressed with and was super helpful for me. It made an impression on me as far as really the impact of, give me a visual of the impact of kind of where people are searching on the internet. So this is a list from 2022, so last year, and you can search these, just get different metrics and numbers where people are actually searching on the internet. I think I counted 4 different sites on here that were pornography sites on the top 20. And then you can also see um, the desktop kind of percentage usage and also the cell phone. I mean, if you're sitting watching the presentation now, if you're not on your cell phone, you got one probably within arm's reach. And so it is so prevalent to have something in your hand that's very powerful and that you can access social media. So uh, not just pornography, but also if you've posted something, you're a teenager, you've posted something, someone's commenting, so you want to know what's going on. So you're reviewing what other people are saying, and so sometimes that can tie into my value is dependent upon if someone liked my post or thinks in some positive way about me. And so, again, I thought this was super helpful to understand really the impact and where people are looking on the internet. And kind of going back to uh, mentioning like the discussion on suicide. It's very easy for people to talk about, yeah, and have fun about like Amazon. Yeah, I get so many Amazon packages in the mail, and yes, I go to Amazon, so it's easy to talk about those things. It's not as easy to ask people about, okay, tell me about your browsing history. Is there anything where you're isolating yourself and you're viewing pornography or you're viewing social media in a super unhealthy way? Are you getting away from that at all during the day? Do you have real social connection where you're sitting down with someone having lunch, those types of things? So I wanted to pull up a couple excerpts, a couple of videos from 2 different interviews. They're widely available online. And so before I do that, I'm going to kind of talk about the 3 people on the screen here. So from left to right, Tristan Harris is a Google project manager, a former Google project manager. And here in a minute, he's going to talk about just uh, what they developed through Google and some of those platforms, and how that absolutely impacted the people that used it, kids specifically. In the middle, you'll see Frances Hagen. You may or may not recognize her. She testified in October 2021, just about there was leaks at Facebook about how the effects of social media um, uh, had the impact they had on young girls specifically. And so she's also a former project manager. And during her testimony, she mentioned that some of the studies they had showed that girls would report feeling bad looking at Instagram, but they didn't know kind of how to stop using that. And so she also emphasized that a lot of times um, young girls, young boys, teenagers would have cyberbullying during the day. They would go home and have it there, and a lot of times the last thing they saw at night was some cruel comment about them. So it isn't like we have a difficult day at work or stressful day at work, and then we can go home and compartmentalize that. Social media is going to follow us all the way home. So it's a huge impact on our mental health. And then the last person that's pictured here is Sean Parker. If you're old like me, and I always say this, don't let the baby face fool you. I'm pretty old. So if you know Sean Parker, he was the original founder of Napster. So back in the day, the free file sharing service. He's also the co-founder of Facebook. So you see an interview from him in a few minutes, just talking about things that they knew were going on as they developed Facebook, um, that absolutely can affect mental health as well. So I'll start out with the video here and it's called, the video here is obviously for 60 minutes, and it's called Brain Hacking. So I'll go ahead and play this for you guys. So this is coming straight from, you know, an insider, someone that's a project manager within Google. And so what I wanted to emphasize on these videos, that one especially, and then of course the one with Sean Parker coming up, is um, I really wanted to, if you would not allow a stranger to come into your home and sit and monitor or influence, what your child is doing in some way. So you would never invite someone in that's a stranger. When you have social media and they have access, there are ways, like he's talking about, for your patient or for a child to be influenced. And so monitoring those things and being aware of some of these things would be super helpful. And so not necessarily completely taking away all access, but I think talking to kids in a non-punitive way um, um, about healthy habits and using social media. So I wanted to emphasize that with that video, and the next one we'll see with Sean. So we know exposure to trauma clinically as a counselor. I know exposure to trauma or abuse can affect your perception of the world, your sense of safety, trust in other people, self-esteem, feelings of power, lack of power or intimacy. So the ongoing concern, obviously, with social media is just the unhealthy, like I said, unhealthy exposure they can have on their mood and their self-esteem as well. And so one of the studies that I'm just going to highlight is from the National Institutes of Mental Health that talks about this as well. So I'm not going to exhaust the slide here, but you can see just the effects it has on just physiologically. Um, uh, Physically, mental health wise, you can see from that study the impact it has on kids. And again, this is not something that they're exposed to outside the house. This is something they bring home and have with them, 24/7. So we're going to move on to the last video here, and this again is Sean Parker, and he is at an Axios event um, and being interviewed about Facebook. So let's go to that. So the last thing I'll mention before I'll turn over to Dr. Simmons is just that these interviews were 2017, and so I don't haven't seen any studies where things have improved. You've actually seen some things maybe hearing recently in the news where things like TikTok are banned at certain educational institutions. I saw something the other day in the Northwest where a school district was suing some social media platforms. So it doesn't look like it's improving. It's something I just really want to emphasize to really maybe be a part of at least a brief screening with your patients. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Simmons.
Thanks, Wiley. So I'm going to kind of echo several of the things that Wiley has already talked about, but wanted to spend some time specifically talking about the impact of technology on sexual behaviors and specifically sexual behaviors in our adolescents. I will preface that this is not always the most fun topic to talk about with your patients. However, as we will find out, it is extremely important and extremely prevalent, probably at least much more so than I ever expected. So quickly, I wanted to touch on one of the reasons that I think it's often so important for us as providers to learn so much about social media usage and online content is that we are, a lot of us, digital immigrants. So, we were not born with a smartphone or a tablet in our hands. I know for me, like, I was in elementary school when the internet started coming out, and my family actually got a computer at home. And so, we have kind of had to learn to speak the language in a digital environment. The children and adolescents that we are currently seeing are very different. They are digital natives. They were born with technology as an integral part of their lives, and they are significantly comfortable using it. And I think that's just really important for us to keep in mind as we're talking not only to our patients, but also to our parents. If you can go ahead and flip the slide, Wiley. So Wiley touched on a good bit of this, but wanted to just touch on a couple of things, especially related to smartphones. And so, like we talked about, we all have pretty easy access to social media, and kids and adolescents are getting smartphones earlier and earlier, and they're even getting tablets and laptops provided to them by school. So in 2018, only about 23% of adolescents had access to a smartphone. Fast forward to 2021, that number was up to 95%. So the vast majority of our adolescents have access to a smartphone, whether that's their own personal smartphone or their parents. Up to 45% of adolescents reported being online almost constantly. So like we also touched on, technology is used for a lot of different things, and some of those things can be very positive. They can be positive interactions, communication, learning, and entertainment. But what we also are coming to find out is that identity is being shaped in a way that we really don't fully understand. Kind of what we think about is the human mind evolves significantly slower than technology does. So technology is evolving and changing at such a rapid pace that our brains really can't keep up with it. And even our research really can't keep up with how these changes in technology are affecting identity formation. And what we also know is that online use is also significantly shaping sexual knowledge, and not necessarily in the best ways. Before we flip to the next slide, I think it doesn't come to any shock that internet use increased during COVID-19. So early studies suggested that Facebook usage was up by 27%, Netflix went up 16%, YouTube up 15%. So we know that that exposure to online materials definitely increased during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So let's talk about pornography, everybody's favorite topic. So before we kind of jump into this, I do want to quickly just define what pornography is in the context of this conversation. So when we talk about pornography, at least today, we are thinking about professionally derived or user-generated pictures or videos intended to sexually arouse the viewer. So these may be things that are professionally created in a studio. These may also just be things that adolescents, adults, whoever are taking and publishing on the internet on their own. These can be videos, these can be photos, and really they range significantly. So kind of what activities and what is depicted, kind of anything and everything. And those can range from very softcore pornography that really is very prevalent even in some of like some TV shows. So, if we think about shows like Orange is the New Black or Game of Thrones, you'll hear a lot of people talking about how that really starts to kind of hedge into the area of softcore pornography. So when we think about exposure to, Wiley, is real quick, just on the chat that it looks like the 60 Minutes chat the videos may still be playing.
Oh.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Thank you. Sorry about
that. No, not a problem. I didn't hear it. So when we think about exposure to pornography, it looks like it's okay. I will kind of caveat this with this is a difficult thing to study. So what we know is that all of the pornography sites require you to at least say that you are 18. And so we really have a super great measure of how many children and adolescents under the age of 18 are viewing pornography. However, our initial studies do suggest that the vast majority of adolescents have viewed pornography at one point in time. So more than 60% of girls and more than 90% of boys have seen online pornography at some point. About 68% say that this was unintentional exposure. So this may be, kind of pop-ups or wrong searches or, kind of multiple things that got suggested on YouTube, and all of a sudden they ended up in a place they didn't really intend to be. However, there are about 50% of boys and 40% of girls that report that they actively sought out pornography the first time they saw it. In the same study, they asked adolescents kind of what their reactions were the first time that they viewed pornography online, and the vast majority said that there was a lot of curiosity and a lot of interest in kind of what they were seeing. Some said they were curious, some said they were shocked, confused. So kind of what we hear is they don't always know what they're looking at those first few times around. Oh, I can change the slide. Wiley, next slide for me. So like I was mentioning, pornography is extremely accessible. If we think back to that chart that Wiley mentioned, he's right that several of those websites that are in the top 20 to 25 of most viewed websites are strictly pornography websites. So the next little bit of data, this is pulled every year. Pornhub, which is one of the largest pornography sites in the United States, does like a year in review. There's like a safe for work version. So if you are curious, you can look it up at work and not be exposed and not have anything weird on your search history. But this was from 2019, and I just thought it was very interesting to really look at how quickly pornography is changing. So if we can go back one slide, sorry. So if we look at 2017, there were about 28.5 billion visits worldwide. That alone is a lot of visits. There were about 4 million videos uploaded, so you could watch 68 years worth of videos. There are about 118 gigabytes of data transferred per second. Fast forward 2 years, and only 2 years, this number of visits has ballooned to 42 million. There were over 6.8 million videos uploaded. So if you started watching now, you would not finish all of the videos that have been uploaded for 169 years. And you'll also see the gigabytes of data that are transferred every single second are changing significantly. Is anyone else having problems seeing the slides?
I don't believe so.
Okay, I just wanted to stop and check real quickly. I wanted to be sure that I wasn't jumping ahead too quickly. So the rise in usage rates is really attributed to the AAA theory. So easy access, affordability, and anonymity. The internet is anonymous. This is very different than having to walk into a store to purchase anything. This is free. You don't have to enter your name, and it is very easily accessible. Wiley, if you can click the next slide for me. I also wanted to point out, and I think it's kind of interesting, that pornography itself is changing. So again, this is from 2019. I actually pulled the 2022 numbers, and I'll mention those in a second. But they looked at their most searched terms of 2019, and I circled just a few that I think are important when we're thinking about our children and adolescents. So the second most searched term was hentai pornography, which is specifically looking at pornography based on anime or manga characters. And so if we kind of pause and think about how many of the patients that we're seeing are interested in that type of media, it's really a concerning statistic. Also, interestingly, when I looked at the 2022 data, hentai pornography had moved up to #1 and was the #1 search term on all of Pornhub. So again, if we're thinking about how easily accessible this is and how this is being targeted to our children and adolescents, it's really changing in a way that is highly appealing to the populations that we work with. Next slide, Wiley. So what's the issue? So a lot of us may have kind of personal or religious beliefs on pornography. But when we are thinking about kind of medical concern, what is medically concerning and socially concerning about exposure to pornography, a couple of things come up. So first, exposure to pornography does have significant impacts on the adolescent mind. So what we know is that when adolescents are viewing pornography, there is
Uh-oh, Dr. Simmons, it looks like you may have frozen.
Oh,
Okay, you're back.
Okay, sorry. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, cool. So what we know is over time, when we have this decrease in the prefrontal cortex, is that we are developing neural pathways that favor impulsivity and self-gratification in a very rapid manner. And the issue is that pornography gives that self-gratification in a very quick and easily accessible way. We also know that when viewing pornography, the pleasure center of the brain has an exaggerated response. So there is a huge spike of dopamine in the brain, which is highly rewarding to youth. So when we think back to kind of thinking about social media and online usage as a slot machine, this is kind of hitting the jackpot. You have this huge rush of dopamine that's very rewarding, and is really creating these neural pathways that favor that self-gratification. Another major problem that we are noticing with exposure to pornography is that it's really becoming a form of sex education. So the graphic on the screen, you'll see that there is a significant percentage of adolescents who really want to emulate what they saw in pornography. And we know that adolescents and children who view pornography think that it's often a realistic view of sex and bodies and development. We also know that adolescents who view higher amounts of pornography have more positive attitudes towards casual sex as well as more aggressive sex. However, what I think we as adults know is that bodies in pornography are not normal and are not kind of the average thing to be expected. There's often a lot of modifications very purposely made. And we also know that pornographic sex is not always safe and consensual sex. We also know that pornography has become more mainstream and more aggressive. Up to 88% of scenes included physical aggression, and about 48% of scenes contained verbal aggression. So again, if we're thinking about our children and adolescents viewing this as something that is normal, something that they want to emulate, those statistics are extremely concerning. Next slide. So I touched on some of these, but just some additional effects of pornography in our children and adolescents. So like I mentioned, there's an unrealistic view of sexual values and sexual beliefs of just what is normal, what should be expected. So girls who viewed pornography actually reported feeling physically inferior to the women that they viewed, while boys reported that they feared they may not be able to perform as men did in the media, which is probably true because a lot of this is fake. There's higher levels of permissive sexual attitudes. So again, kind of that more comfortable attitudes towards casual sex. This can also result in sexual preoccupation. So again, if you're seeing these things constantly, if you're having that self-gratification, those things can come to be accepted as normal and is actually something to strive for. We also know that regular viewing of pornography can lead to earlier sexual experimentation, increased sexually aggressive behavior, as well as negative effects of on their self-esteem and self-concept. So adolescents who used pornography reported that they had lower self-confidence, especially as they continued to develop. So again, research is new and often very difficult to conduct. It's not like we can say, hey, like, parents, would you like to sign your child up for a study where we sit them down and have them watch pornography? IRBs are not really going to go for that. So there's a lot of further investigation that needs to be done on the long-term impacts of pornography viewing in adolescents. Next slide, Wiley. Real quickly, I did want to touch on pornography addiction because I think this is a question that kind of regularly comes up, especially from parents. So there can be kind of a number of terms that are used to describe problematic pornographic usage, such as compulsive viewing, impulsive viewing, hypersexual disorder. And we really kind of think of this as a behavioral addiction. So rather than having a physical addiction to a substance, this is rather kind of a compulsive behavior that's detrimental to a person's well-being. So it may mean that a child or an adolescent is missing out on other life activities because they are more interested in watching pornography. At present, the DSM has not included a sexual addiction or a pornography addiction. So definite criteria is a little vague. But what we can kind of say is that we would largely think that a pornography addiction could be classified as an internet addiction disorder, kind of rather than a separate identity and a separate disorder. So we would be thinking about pornography viewing as an addiction when it becomes obsessive, compulsive, and starts to interfere in normal daily behaviors. So if they are isolating from their friends, if they are pulling out of their normal activities, if their school performance is suffering, that's when we would probably start to be concerned. And if you suspect a pornography addiction, a referral to a licensed provider with experience in treating adolescent addictions is really important. Next slide. So what can we as providers and what can parents do? Our role as provider often has to do with educating parents not only on the information that we just talked about, but then what to turn around and do with that information. We can be educating the adolescents that are in our office on these things, and we know that we have a limited amount of time with them. And a lot of this education and this monitoring needs to be parent-driven. So we can really be working with and talking with parents on what they can be doing in the household to ensure that there is safe social media usage, as well as kind of safe exposure that lines up with family values to pornography. So first and foremost, we need parents to understand how easily accessible pornography is in this day and age. So again, I think a lot of parents think like, oh, my child will never see that. We have parental controls, it's no big deal. And really what I have started telling parents is this is no longer a question of if your child sees pornography. This is now a question of when your child is exposed to pornography. So you really need to be prepared of how you want to handle it. Also want parents to understand, and children and adolescents to understand, the local laws about child-produced explicit images. So sexting or sending sexually explicit images is illegal in Texas, even if no adult is involved. So if a child or an adolescent is taking a picture of themselves and sending it to a classmate or a peer or a boyfriend, that is still illegal. Now there are different, it's classified as a misdemeanor, not a felony. You're not going to be charged with like producing child pornography. However, this is still something that we need adolescents to be aware of. We also need them to understand that if you take an image someone sent you and distribute it to other people without consent, now we're looking at a felony for distributing child pornography, and that's a big deal. Probably the most important thing that parents can do is monitor. So things that we typically recommend. Consider keeping electronics in a shared space. So this includes all forms of technology. So smartphones, tablets, laptops, gaming consoles. That's a huge one. Parents often forget that their children can access the internet via their gaming consoles. So that is something to pay attention to. On our next slide, or a couple of slides, we're also going to provide some links to just kind of some parental control apps that can be useful. I also recommend that parents do additional checking and monitoring because, again, This generation is digital natives, and they are very good, unfortunately, at navigating and getting around parental controls. We also want to be sure that parents understand and they're aware of what their children are watching. So when we have families in treatment, one of the things that I really challenge parents to do is do an activity where you spend some time watching what your child is watching and really pay attention to the adult content that they're being exposed to. Often families are really shocked by what they find and what they notice. A couple of other things that I always encourage, we want to think about family values and kind of what parents feel comfortable with their children doing online. And this is going to differ from every family. In a couple of slides, again, I have a pretty easy handout that just kind of looks at different online behaviors and at what age each parent thinks that, you know, that specific parent, that specific family thinks that those behaviors are appropriate. We also want to prepare parents and want parents to start thinking about what is going to be their response and how are they going to respond when their child encounters inappropriate electronic content. Again, it's going to happen. It's just something that parents need to prepare for, no matter how uncomfortable it is. What we really want parents to understand is we want your children to be coming to you with these questions rather than feeling like coming to you and talking about these things is unsafe or might get them in trouble. And then, so again, a lot of parents aren't prepared for this. They're very uncomfortable with it. They may react very strongly, very negatively, which discourages youth from continuing to bring those questions. So we really want to prepare parents like, this is going to happen. How do you want to respond to it? And then finally, probably one of the most important things is that parents should be providing age-appropriate sex education from a young age. This is, again, something that not a lot of parents love talking about. But what we know is that, we know that our schools in Texas are not providing comprehensive sex education. And so a lot of our youth are seeking out that information, whether from Google or their peers or pornography, and that is not always very reliable information. So really what I challenge parents is, I think that most of you would prefer that your child is coming to you with these types of questions and concerns rather than relying on Google or pornography to understand what is healthy, safe, and consensual sex. So again, parents don't love these conversations. I think as we as providers don't always love these conversations. And the more that we can be doing to empower parents, the better. So a couple of resources. These are just some really good resources, and we can share this PowerPoint as well. So a family and media plan can really help families create kind of something that they think is appropriate. Wiley, I don't know if you want to touch on any of these, or if you want me to talk about them.
No, I'll definitely. So I lost control on the PowerPoint for just a minute, so we dumped.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's my fault. So I just wanted to add, there's a resource here in a couple slides. It's called a Gab phone. It's called Gab, and so what it is basically parents. You cannot upload any apps that are not already. So they're restricted. And there's a link to purchase the phone, and so it's basically protected, so kids can't upload some app that you don't want them to have access to, and it's talk and text only, so no internet use. And so I'm not anti-internet use. I think it is good to talk to your kids about internet use. They're going like Dr. Sims, they're going to be exposed to the internet. They just are. Mm-hmm. And so talking to them about a good, healthy way to use the internet, maybe, set times where you're around. So anyway, I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Simmons. Let you.
Yeah. And if we can go back a couple of slides, I think 2 slides. Yeah, here we go. So this I can also send out. This is published. These types of resources are published by the Consortium of the Sexual Behavior of Youth. And they put out really great materials that are written by parents for parents, kind of specifically about how to talk to your child about online kind of online things that they may be exposed to. So this is just a really great resource. The entire website has some good resources, but I personally like this newsletter specifically because, like I said, it's written by parents for parents and really gives a good hands-on approach of how to talk about these things. And then one slide forward. And like I mentioned, this is just a sample of the family values worksheet that we sometimes work on. So you'll see that there's just a lot of different online behaviors. And kind of at what age parents think that those types of behaviors are appropriate. So when we're thinking about developing a family media plan and things that are kind of safe and unsafe, we can be identifying values, and then we can also be really encouraging parents to talk about not only setting those limits for your kids, but also talking to them about why those limits are in place. So for example, if watching a sexually explicit TV show or a movie is something that you don't think should happen until 17 or adulthood, why? Tell your child why you think that that's important. You know, it could be that this is an accurate view of sex and we want you to have kind of healthy views of what sexual development looks like, or whatever it might be for that specific family. And then one more slide. So again, this kind of brings us back to our specific resources. So like we said, there's kind of several things that parents can use. I put the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth on here, and then the very last link is parental control apps. So just some good things for parents to be kind of using and putting on devices to be sure that they are on the same page and monitoring what their children are exposed to. Next slide.
And these are some, yeah, so these are some local resources can address some pornography use, pornography addiction. I would definitely want to add some real practical local resources that we verified through CPAN.
And I will also touch on that these are not just for pornography addiction, but can also be useful for internet addiction as a whole. Yes. So, you know, we know that children are only watching pornography online. They're doing a lot of different types of things, whether that be Snapchat or TikTok or, you know, what I don't even, Discord. I can't even keep up with like all of the new developments half the time. But anytime that we are seeing a behavior that's becoming compulsive, impulsive, and is interfering in daily activities, that's when we really want to start thinking about, is this getting into the realm of an addiction? Okay. So I think that that is all the information that we have. So Wiley, is there anything else that you want to add before we open the floor for questions?
No, I've touched upon this, and if anybody's interested, obviously, let me know. I can get you the link, but if you just Google Gab phone, you can definitely find more information about that. So that is it. We're opening it up to questions for anybody.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Simmons, Wiley. Great information. So yes, if you'd like to ask a question, you can either ask it in the chat, or we'll go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to ask those questions. We'll stay until all the questions are exhausted.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad we knocked out your questions as we went along.
This is a tough topic to bring up. I think about the time that providers have, pediatricians, family medicine providers and such, and the time is so limited. I'm glad that you touched on the fact that this isn't necessarily a fun topic to bring up, because then what do you do with it? If they say to you, well, yeah, I sort of do watch it, it's like, oh, I've opened up a rat's nest, or I've opened up almost Pandora's box at that point and open up to questions. What's the first thing you think a provider should do, Dr. Simmons, when they hear that? What would you recommend?
So, I mean, I think that it also goes back to, like, we also have to be aware of our personal values, because, you know, there may be some of us that, you know, kind of sit here and say, oh, well, viewing any pornography is wrong. So there's really a spectrum, I think, so we need to be aware of kind of how our personal values play into this. But I think when it gets brought up, one of the things we really want to be thinking about is, how does this fit into their overall lives? You know, is this something that, really isn't taking up a lot of time, that's really just something that's kind of done quickly. So I would ask very specific questions about how often are you, viewing these materials? How much time are you spending on social media or on the internet? And how is it affecting your other activities? Beyond that, I would also just recommend when you're kind of touching base with parents, go ahead and provide some of these resources. If you want to create kind of a simple handout in your clinic, or have some of these kind of have some of those newsletters printed out, I think going ahead and providing those to parents starting at a pretty early age can just get that conversation started.
There's a question in here. I think it's just great. What recommendations do you have for starting that line of communication with your children about these issues? So let's say that there's a provider on here that has kiddos and they saw those ages and they're thinking, oh, wow, 11 or 12, I guess I need to have that conversation. How do you start that?
Wiley, do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So like I mentioned, I think one of the best things that parents can be doing is start having these conversations at an early age. I'm happy to kind of provide some books, some resources. We're obviously not going to tell an 8-year-old the same thing that we're going to tell a 15-year-old, but we do want children from an early age to understand what's happening with their bodies, as well as what to expect. So I think the more that these conversations can just be kind of a typical part of the things that you talk about, rather than this kind of taboo, scary subject, the better. Because again, the more you have that open line of communication with your children and with your adolescents, the more they're also going to be willing to bring you questions as things come up. So really, I think that's kind of my biggest recommendation is start early. Don't make it a taboo thing. Just kind of make it another point of conversation of hey, here are the things that we talk about. We talk about how to keep our grades up at school. We talk about, how to take care of our bodies. We talk about kind of healthy sexual development.
Great. Other questions from the group?
I'll just add too, as we're waiting on other questions, is just that don't feel like you have to know or have all the answers if you're not sure. If there are providers, so from a provider perspective, obviously contact us at CPN. We definitely want to help out, support you in that, and get you again some real practical information. I think Dr. Simmons says just everything she mentioned is fantastic. But also, I've had conversation before in the past, just one-on-one with the provider about this issue, and so call us. It just isn't talked about very much. So let us know if we can support you. Don't feel like you have to have all the answers. I'll see another question.
And Amber, I think that's a great point that kind of when we start thinking about puberty, when we start talking about puberty, that's also a really natural time to start talking about, those more sensitive subjects and kind of all the fun stuff that comes along with puberty. So we know that kind of sexual desires are going to change in that period of time. So let's prepare our adolescents for what to expect and how to deal with those changes in a healthy way. So great suggestion.
Mm-hmm. What else? Well, it looks like we have a quiet group here on Monday. Dr. Simmons and Wiley, thank you so much for your time today and your expertise. Really appreciate just the guidance and direction on this topic. This is one of those things that is a challenge to discuss, and having that guidance that you've provided will be very helpful for those that are on here as providers and as maybe parents or uncles or aunts or guardians that may be needing to work with our children. There are more and more grandparents that are raising children these days too, and it's just not what it was 30 years ago. So that this is good education for everybody. Our folks from UT Tyler School of Nursing, Dr. Gibson, Vicki, do you have anything that you want to add here for the nurses that may be on here?
It was a great presentation, a lot of applicable information for nurses and all healthcare providers and those that interact with adolescents. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I'll go ahead and put the QR codes back up and let those run for a bit. Vicki, do you have anything you want to add?
No, ma'am, not at this time.
All right.
And then I do want to point out quickly, Wiley and Laura, you might be able to help with this, but Monica Fent asked about any resources for Houston. So I don't know if we can possibly look into some addiction resources and some things around the Houston area.
And Monica,
Yeah.
I would absolutely contact your CPAN clinic there. You're with UTMB. They have the CPAN program there, and they can provide you with those that are as close to your area. If you're not in the Northeast Texas region, contact your local CPAN hub. If you don't know that number, Wiley, will you pop that in the chat for me, please? I'm getting pop-ups and I can't get to the chat, but I will go ahead right now and share the screen again here. And then I will bring up the one for the nursing as well here in just a moment. That's the one for physicians, nurse practitioners. And then here's the one for nursing. We thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. Our presenters will be on here for just another minute. Again, here is the one for Cloud CME today. You only have until 1 a.m. to complete that.
Okay. And I dropped my email in the chat, so please feel free to reach out with any questions. I actually have to jump off to go teach my class over at UT Tyler, but definitely feel free to reach out and email me if I can help with anything additional.
Thanks
Thank you
so much,
all.
Dr. Simmons. Bye now.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons.